My boss once forced me to crawl into the office with a 102-degree fever, and that decision ended up destroying his entire company. I'm not exaggerating when I say that morning felt like walking into hell. My skin was burning, my throat felt like sandpaper, and every muscle in my body screamed at me to stay in bed. But instead of compassion, I got a phone call that would change everything. He barked through the phone. If you're not here in 30 minutes, don't bother coming back at all. That was it. No room for argument, no concern that I could barely stand. Just an ultimatum. And like a fool desperate to keep his job, I dragged myself out of bed, threw on the first wrinkled shirt I could find, and stumbled into the freezing morning air. Before I go any further, let me just say, if you're into stories of revenge, betrayal, and people finally getting what they deserve, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the wild twists coming your way. Trust me, this one gets dark. I remember the elevator ride up to the fifth floor like it happened yesterday. I was clutching the railing, trying not to collapse before the doors opened. When I finally shuffled into the office, every pair of eyes turned on me. My coworkers' faces told the story better than words ever could. Horror, disbelief, and a little bit of pity. I must have looked like a corpse dragging itself to its own funeral. But not my boss. Oh no. He was standing there, leaning against his office door with that smug little grin he always wore. Well, look who finally decided to show up, he said loud enough for the entire floor to hear. Some people chuckled nervously, but most just turned back to their screens. No one wanted to get caught in his line of fire. I tried to sit down at my desk, but the second I did, a wave of dizziness nearly knocked me to the floor. My hands trembled so hard I could barely keep them on the keyboard, and instead of sympathy, I heard my boss call out, "Don't fall asleep on my time. You're getting paid, remember?" The humiliation was almost worse than the sickness. Almost. He strutted through the aisles like a king inspecting his soldiers, making sure everyone saw me suffering but still working. "See?" he said, clapping his hands together. "That's dedication. That's the kind of grit I expect from all of you." He actually used my misery as a teaching moment, like I was some kind of example of loyalty and toughness. Inside, I was boiling. My fever was high, but my anger was higher. And as I sat there, coughing into my sleeve, I couldn't shake the thought, he's going to regret this. I don't know how, but he will. The rest of that day is a blur. I remember sweating through my shirt, my head pounding like a drum, and every hour feeling like a year. I drank water until I thought I'd drown, but nothing helped. Every time I coughed, my whole body rattled. Still, I typed away, barely making sense of the numbers on the screen. At one point, I staggered to the bathroom just to splash water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror, and honestly, I didn't even recognize the man staring back. Sunken eyes, pale skin, hair plastered to my forehead with sweat. I looked like death. And for what? To please a boss who didn't care if I lived or died, as long as I filled out my spreadsheets. By the time I finally clocked out, I could barely stand. I crawled back into my car, shaking and coughing, and for a moment I thought I might not even make it home. But I did. Barely. And as I collapsed onto my bed, too weak to even change clothes, I had no idea that my suffering that day had planted the seed for something much bigger, and something that would come back to haunt him in ways he couldn't imagine. Because here's the thing, when you force a sick man to come into work, you don't just get his labor, you get his sickness too. And that's exactly what I left behind in that office. I woke up the next morning feeling worse, the kind of ache that crawls into your bones and sets up camp. I called my boss, Brent, twice and got voicemail both times. No surprise, I took 2 ibuprofen, wrapped a scarf around my neck like it could hold me together, and went in anyway. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and stress. By the time I reached our floor, I could hear the familiar clatter of keyboards and the low hiss of the espresso machine. Routine. Normal, except it wasn't. Maya, who sat one row over, had a wheezy cough that didn't sound like a tickle. It sounded deep, stubborn, Her eyes were glassy, a red crescent under each one. She tried to smile when she saw me, then coughed into her elbow and winced. You okay? I asked, voice low. She gave a thumbs up like we were on camera. I glanced at the break room. Our wall dispenser for hand sanitizer was empty. Someone had taped a post-it on it. Refill? No one had. At 9:10 a.m., Brent strode out for the team huddle, clapping like this was a pep rally. All right, Warriors, he said. Big week. Clients Friday, no excuses. He scanned the room, stopped on me just long enough to smirk, then moved on. When Maya coughed mid-sentence, he paused and raised an eyebrow. You good? She nodded, apologetic. If you can sit, you can work, he said, like it was company scripture. A few people exchanged looks. None of us said a word. By noon, the office had a new soundtrack. Coughs in different keys, sneezes behind privacy screens, the soft rustle of tissue boxes making the rounds. The air felt stale, heavy. Our maintenance guy, Luis, wheeled a ladder into the hallway to check a ceiling vent. He unscrewed the old filter, held it up, and grimaced. It was gray-black, like a sponge that had lived under a car. Been asking for replacements for months, he muttered. Brent walked by, didn't break stride. Handle it, he said. Luis shrugged and kept working. I slid my planner out of the drawer and wrote a few easy-to-miss lines. 11:32, Maya coughing hard. 11:45, sanitizer empty. 12:05, Luis, filter rotten. It wasn't revenge yet. It was memory insurance. People like Brent had a way of rewriting history, turning neglect into necessity, cruelty into standards. I wasn't about to let him narrate over me again. After lunch, the messages started trickling into Slack. Tom from billing. Headed home, fever. Join from customer success. Chills, might log off. Brent replied to one of them in the public channel. If you're well enough to type, you're well enough to work. He added a smiley, one of those dead-eyed default ones that somehow makes everything worse. The reactions under his message were all the safe ones. Thumbs up, rocket ship. I didn't react. At 2 p.m. he called me into his glass-walled office, the one he kept too cold to feel important. You look rough, he said, not kindly, more like an accusation. He slid a folder toward me. I need the numbers for Friday's deck cleaned up. You missed 3 decimals yesterday. I didn't argue, my vision pulsed at the edges, but I focused until the rows of figures stopped swimming. He hovered just a little too close, the way people who love power always do. We need wins, he said. Heroes. He let that hang in the air like he was offering me a costume and a cape if I'd just ignore the blood on them. Back at my desk, Maya leaned over and whispered, he really wouldn't let you stay home. I kept my eyes on the screen. He made it clear. She sighed, then turned away, coughing again, shoulders shaking. A minute later, Tom messaged me privately. Going to urgent care. Boss says to keep my laptop on. That legal? I typed, document everything, then deleted it and sent, feel better. Keep your powder dry. By late afternoon, the empty chairs were obvious. HR sent a chipper email. Friendly reminder, our culture values resilience. Please communicate any needs with your managers. It read like it was written by a committee that never left the conference room. I forwarded it to my personal email and filed it under a folder I'd labeled just in case. At 5:03, Brent gathered the survivors again. Friday is still happening, he said. No pity parties. I've already covered 2 roles today. He laughed at his own line, then clapped his hands once, sharp. Push through. As he spoke, he cleared his throat twice, the kind of clear that drags. It was small, easy to miss. I didn't miss it. On the subway home, I watched a woman in scrubs nod off 3 stops in a row, her head tapping the glass like a metronome. I thought about the post-it on the empty sanitizer, the dead filter, the way Maya apologized for coughing. I thought about Brent's office. Expensive chair, perfect posture, that chill in the air that made your knuckles ache. There's a special kind of cold that isn't temperature, it's policy. When I got home, I left my shoes by the door and collapsed onto the couch. The ceiling fan buzzed like a low warning. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the day's messages again, screenshotting anything that mattered. HR's email, Brent's Slack comment, the attendance log. Then I opened notes and wrote, I didn't plan any of this, but I'm done playing on his field. That night, my fever slipped higher, my dreams full of fluorescent lights and Brent's clap, clap, clap. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. Another message from Maya, time-stamped 1:19 a.m. Going to the ER, can't breathe right. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the screen until the text blurred. The next morning would bring numbers, actual ugly numbers, that even Brent couldn't brush away. But as I lay there blinking into the dark, I felt something shift. Not relief, not victory. Just a quiet certainty that the fuse he'd lit with his pride was already burning, and the sparks were finally visible in the dark. By Wednesday, the office felt like an empty stage after the show ended. Props still out, actors gone. Our attendance board, the one IT auto-populated from logins, showed a field of gray dots. Half the team hadn't even pinged the server. HR sent a wellness check calendar invite for noon. Brent declined it with a note. Priorities, Friday. The man could ignore reality like it was a spam email. I took stock without making a scene. 3 empty chairs in sales, 2 in billing, 1 in legal. The phones rang longer before voicemail kicked in. The break room microwave hummed to an audience of none. When Maya's desk phone lit up with her mother's name, it rang and rang until the light died. I added a line to my private log, head count down 6, critical, contract team at 50%. Not revenge, just a record no one could erase. At 10:18 a.m., our client's assistant emailed, confirming Friday agenda and who's presenting each section. In normal times, that's a 2-minute reply. Today it was a trap. Ownership of 3 slides belonged to people who were either home with fevers or texting me from urgent care. Brent walked by, saw me hovering over the email and said, "Put my name on everything. I'll carry it." He coughed into his fist and missed the trash can with a crumpled tissue. It sat there like a white flag he refused to see. I opened the deck and started relocating tasks. Not sabotage, triage. I pulled assets into a single shared folder and renamed them with clean, idiot-proof titles. Then I built a 1-page heat map that showed who owned what and who was out. Simple, cold, undeniable. Red blocks stacked where Maya's team should have been. I sent the map to Brent and HR with a neutral subject line, coverage snapshot. Brent replied 5 minutes later, "Appreciate the hustle. Keep moving." HR wrote back privately, "Can we delay the key? Meeting? Health is a concern." Brent ARs mentioned them in the main channel. Per leadership, Friday stands. Leadership meant Brent. Around noon, HR's wellness call went forward without him. It was 5 screens of tired faces and 1 lawyer I'd never met, her background blurred, voice precise. If you're symptomatic, please do not come on site. Document interactions with your manager. Heads bobbed. No one said Brent's name, but we didn't need to. I kept my camera off and took notes in the same file as my logs. Somewhere between legal language and throat clearing, I felt something settle inside me. If Brent insisted on playing chicken with people's health, I wasn't stepping off the road. I was building guardrails. I called the anonymous compliance hotline from the stairwell where the cell reception was best. I didn't embellish. I read from my notes the empty sanitizer station, the blackened air filter, the Slack message about if you can type, you can work, the mounting absences. The operator's voice was calm, clinical. "We'll open a case. Your report is confidential." I hung up and stood there with the metal railing cool under my palm, listening to the muffled office hum through the door. Back at my desk, I watched Brent host a quick stand-up in the small glass conference room. 8 chairs, no open windows, a table too close for comfort. He talked like a coach in the fourth quarter, tight jaw, clipped sentences. Twice he stopped to swallow hard. "We don't miss," he said. "Not this week." When someone asked if we could move Friday to a hybrid format, he'd laughed, a breathless little sound. "We're not a webinar company. We show up." He loved that line so much he posted it in Slack afterward. The reactions were quiet. That afternoon, I requested a deep clean of the conference rooms through facilities. Scheduled for Monday, the ticket came back. Useless. I forwarded the ticket to HR anyway. Then I wrote the client's assistant a careful reply. Confirming agenda. Due to staffing illness, we may need to consolidate presenters. Recommendations attached. I attached the heat map. I didn't point fingers. The colors spoke for themselves. By 3, the building's air felt overused like a bus after rain. I stepped outside for air and saw Luis loading a box of new filters into a cart. "Got the approval," he said, tapping the cardboard. "A month late." He shrugged a yes or no shrug and pushed the cart inside. Sometimes systems respond eventually. Sometimes they need a nudge. When I came back to my desk, a message from Maya waited. Short. "They kept me for observation overnight. Don't let him spin this." I stared at the words until they steadied. Then I opened a new document, clean title, time-stamped, and wrote the sentence that shifted everything. If leadership won't protect us, the truth will. I wasn't going to leak anything. I was going to make the truth impossible to ignore. At 5:21, Brent called an all-hands for the morning. Final prep before glory. He added a winking emoji that felt like static in my teeth. As people clicked maybe, I watched him through the glass, posture perfect, tie straight, color a shade too pale. He wiped his brow and looked at his hand like the sweat had betrayed him. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The fuse he lit on Monday was still burning, steady and quiet. Friday's meeting was the powder keg, and now with my map in the client's inbox and a compliance case number in mine, the room he chose for victory was starting to look a lot like a trap he'd built for himself. Thursday morning hit like a wall. The office was nearly silent. No chatter, no phones ringing, just the occasional cough echoing down the hall. Desks that should have been filled with the energy of a team preparing for a career-defining pitch sat empty. Out of 30 people, fewer than 10 had shown up, and half of them looked like extras from a hospital waiting room. Brent swept through the room, trying to hide the fact that his skin was pale and his steps heavier than usual. He clapped his hands together like he always did. "Eyes on the prize. Tomorrow's the big day." His voice cracked mid-sentence, and for a split second, he pressed his palm against his chest as if to steady himself. No one called him out. I kept my head down, updating my heat map. Red had swallowed nearly every square. It wasn't a chart anymore, it was a warning siren. I sent the updated version to HR and CC'd the client's assistant again. This time I didn't add commentary. The silence between the lines was enough. Around noon, Brent pulled me into his office. His tie was crooked and beads of sweat gathered at his temple. He pointed at the spreadsheet on my laptop. "This contract is everything. If I close it, we're untouchable." His eyes were bloodshot, voice raw, but he leaned in anyway. "Don't think I don't see what you're doing. You think I'm weak. You think this company is weak, but tomorrow will prove you wrong." I didn't argue, I just nodded, knowing he was running on fumes and ego. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another message from Maya. "Doctors found fluid in my lungs. He can't ignore this." I locked the screen before Brent noticed. By afternoon, HR escalated. a company-wide email landed in every inbox. Effective immediately, all non-essential in-person meetings are suspended until further notice. Health and safety come first. It should have been the end of the story, but Brent replied, all within minutes. Tomorrow's meeting is essential. See you there. The tension in the office was electric. You could feel it in the way people avoided eye contact, the way chairs squeaked as folks shifted uncomfortably. No one dared challenge him outright, but the unease was visible. Later, as I walked past the conference room, I saw Brent, rehearsing alone. He stood at the head of the table talking to empty chairs, his voice hoarse but forceful. At one point, he slammed his hand on the table and doubled over coughing. He straightened up quickly, pretending it didn't happen, but through the glass I saw him grip the back of a chair for balance. That night, I stayed late, finishing the slides. Every cough that rattled through the building sounded louder than the last. The janitor, wearing gloves and a mask, paused by my desk. "Place feels cursed," he muttered before moving on. I saved the final deck and sent it to the client with a short note. "Prepared and ready. Attendance may be impacted." It was neutral, professional, but I knew the words carried weight. As I packed up to leave, I glanced at Brent's office one last time. He was still in there, jacket off, tie undone, pacing like a caged animal. His reflection in the glass looked more like a ghost than a leader. He caught my eye, forced a smile, and mouthed, "We win tomorrow." But the truth was already written. Tomorrow wasn't going to be his victory. Tomorrow was going to be his reckoning. Friday arrived like the first clap of thunder before a storm. You could feel the air change before anything even happened. By 8:30 a.m., the conference room was set. Long, polished table, bottles of water lined like soldiers, a projector humming, waiting to display what was left of our team's work. But the seats around the table told the real story. Out of 30, only 5 of us were there. The rest? Sick, gone, silent. Brent walked in wearing a suit that looked sharper than his face. His tie was straight, but his complexion was ghostly, a shade too pale. He tried to smile, but it looked like a crack in a fragile mask. He cleared his throat and said, "Today decides everything, no excuses." The irony was so thick it was hard not to choke on it. At 9 sharp, the clients arrived. 3 executives in tailored suits, their assistant trailing behind with a laptop bag. They shook hands cautiously, eyes darting around the empty chairs. One of them asked, "Is this the full team?" Brent didn't hesitate. "We run lean. Efficiency is our strength." His voice was rough, strained, and I caught the quick flare of confusion on the client's face. The presentation began. Brent launched into the opening slides, his hands cutting the air as if he could will confidence into existence. For 10 minutes, it almost worked. But then the cracks widened. His breathing turned shallow, his words slowed, and sweat collected along his hairline. When a client asked a direct question about figures that Maya should have handled, he froze for just a moment too long. I stepped in smoothly, clicking to the right slide, and answered with the data I'd memorized. The client nodded, but their gaze shifted to me, not Brent. He didn't like that. I could see it in the tightness of his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the table. Halfway through, he coughed so hard he had to excuse himself. He left the room for 2 minutes, water bottle clutched like a lifeline. The clients exchanged glances. One of them whispered something I couldn't catch, but their expressions said it all. Doubt. When Brent returned, he forced a smile and tried to regain momentum, but the rhythm was gone. Every cough cut his sentences, every pause grew heavier. The clients asked about timelines, and again, the people responsible weren't there. Their absences filled the room louder than any words could. I kept covering, sliding in details, making sure no question hung unanswered. And while I spoke, I saw something shift. The clients were no longer listening to Brent at all. They were watching me. He knew it too. His eyes darted toward me, a flicker of resentment buried under fatigue. By the end of the meeting, the mood was undeniable. The clients closed their laptops slowly, thanked us politely, but there was no spark of partnership, no handshake deal. Just the cold professionalism of people who had already decided, this company is unstable. When the door shut behind them, Brent collapsed into a chair. His suit jacket sagged, his tie hung loose, and he pressed his hands to his face. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally, he whispered, "They're not coming back, are they?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The truth was written in every empty chair, every unanswered phone, every cough that still echoed down the hall. He had demanded I show up sick. He had demanded strength when all we needed was sense. And now his empire, built on arrogance and denial, was crumbling in front of him. Tomorrow, the fallout would begin. But in that moment, I let him sit there, drowning in the silence he had created. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. I rolled over, eyes still heavy, and saw the sender, the client's assistant. The subject line hit harder than any alarm. Post-meeting follow-up. I opened it and read the words that sealed Brent's fate. After careful consideration, we've decided not to proceed at this time. We wish you the best. No anger, no second chance, just a cold, polite rejection. By the time I logged into my work email, the news had spread. The rejection was copied to Brent, HR, and half the executive chain. My inbox was filling with side messages, coworkers sending me screenshots, some with disbelief, others with relief. One read simply, "He did this to himself." I dragged myself out of bed and into the office. The building felt heavier than usual, like it knew what had happened. When I stepped onto our floor, I saw Brent in the conference room, the same one where he'd promised victory. He was sitting alone at the table, jacket off, head in his hands. The projector screen still glowed with the final slide. Future growth opportunities. The irony was brutal. HR arrived mid-morning. 2 reps, one carrying a laptop, the other holding a stack of forms. They walked straight to Brent's office. Through the glass walls, everyone could see the conversation. Brent tried to argue, his hands chopping the air, but his voice was hoarse and his face slick with sweat. The HR rep stayed calm, pointing to documents, shaking her head slowly. After 15 minutes, Brent slumped back in his chair, defeated. Word traveled fast. The compliance case had caught up with him. Between the hotline report, the attendance collapse, and the client's rejection, leadership had no choice. He wasn't just losing a contract, he was losing the company's trust. Around noon, Brent gathered the survivors for one last update. His voice cracked as he stood at the head of the room. "We hit a bump," he said, trying to soften what was already obvious. "But this doesn't define us." He coughed mid-sentence, eyes darting as if daring anyone to challenge him. No one did. People just stared, hollow-eyed, waiting for the farce to end. When the meeting broke, he cornered me near the elevator. His eyes were bloodshot and his breath rattled. "You think you won, don't you?" he whispered. His hand gripped the metal rail, not me, but close enough to feel threatening. "Don't fool yourself. I built this place. It doesn't fall apart in a week." I met his gaze and said nothing. Silence can be sharper than words. He held the stare for a beat, then staggered back toward his office, shoulders heavy. That evening, the emails started. Senior staff announcing personal leave. Clients pausing partnerships, recruiters sniffing around. The company wasn't dead yet, but the cracks were spreading faster than anyone could patch them. I sat at my desk long after the lights dimmed, scrolling through the trail of evidence. Screenshots, logs, emails. Not to gloat, not to share, just to remind myself it was real. For months, he had forced us to swallow his arrogance. Now the truth was swallowing him whole. When I finally packed up to leave, I walked past Brent's office. He was still there, staring at the dark window like it might give him answers. His reflection looked small, almost broken. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The fuse had burned down. The explosion had already happened. And Brent was sitting in the wreckage, still pretending he could rebuild it. By Monday, the company felt like a sinking ship. Desks were abandoned, chairs pushed back as if their owners had fled mid sentence. The Slack channels told the story clearer than any announcement, farewell messages stacking one after another. It's been a ride. Time for a change. Wishing everyone the best. Each ping was another nail in Brent's coffin. Clients weren't waiting around either. Two partnership contracts vanished overnight, one citing concerns about operational stability. Another simply stopped responding. The legal team was down to one overworked junior, associate, and she looked ready to walk too. Brent tried to hold it together. He summoned us for an all hands in the conference room, though fewer than 10 showed up. He stood at the head of the table with dark circles under his eyes, his once crisp suit wrinkled and tired. Listen, he began, his voice raw. This is just turbulence. We hold steady, we push forward. But no one believed him anymore. People avoided his gaze, flipping through phones, nodding mechanically. One brave soul, a senior account manager, finally spoke. Brent, the clients are leaving. The staff is gone. We can't keep pretending. Her words cut the air sharper than any cough. He slammed his fist on the table. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I built this company. His voice cracked, echoing against glass walls that used to symbolize transparency, but now only magnified his collapse. The account manager gathered her things and walked out without another word. The door clicking shut was louder than his outburst. I sat quietly, watching. For once, I didn't feel the need to intervene. Brent was unraveling on his own, each thread pulled by his arrogance. Later that afternoon, HR released an internal memo. Effective immediately, employees may pursue remote opportunities until further notice. Leadership changes under review. It was corporate language for Brent's days are numbered. Screenshots of the memo spread like wildfire. I forwarded it to Maya, who was still in recovery. She texted back, "Good, he can't hurt anyone else now." That night, Brent sent one last desperate email to the entire company. It was long, rambling, filled with half-promises and empty motivational quotes. "We are stronger than this," it ended. But by then, nobody was listening. Replies were auto-responses, out-of-office notices, or silence. As I shut down my computer, I realized something. Revenge didn't need to be loud. It didn't need to be flashy. Sometimes the cruelest justice was letting a man choke on the ruins of his own pride. And Brent was already choking. By Wednesday, the announcement everyone had been waiting for finally dropped. A company-wide email hit our inboxes at 9:02 a.m. Subject line, Leadership Update. The body was short, clinical, and devastating for Brent. Effective immediately, Brent Walker has been relieved of his duties as CEO. Interim leadership will be announced shortly. We thank him for his contributions and wish him well. No fanfare. No farewell party. Just a few sterile lines erasing years of his control. The office erupted, not in cheers, but in the sound of instant messages, whispers, and the unmistakable sigh of collective relief. Some people smiled openly for the first time in months. Others simply leaned back in their chairs, letting the weight of his shadow slide off their shoulders. I walked past Brent's office out of habit, but the blinds were drawn and the door locked. He was gone. No chance for a final speech, no dramatic send-off. Just gone, like a ghost that had finally given up haunting. The interim leadership memo named a board member no one had ever met. Promises of stability, rebuilding trust, and a new chapter filled the email. But most of us knew the truth. The company's reputation had already taken a hit it might never recover from. Around lunch, a recruiter reached out to me directly. "We've seen your work, heard good things. Ever thought about leading a project team elsewhere?" The timing was almost cinematic. That evening, as I sat at my desk, I thought about the months I'd spent documenting, enduring, and waiting. I thought about the way Brent had humiliated me, forcing me to drag myself in sick, parading my suffering like some kind of lesson for others. And now the empire he built on intimidation had crumbled, not because I shouted, not because I struck back, but because the truth was louder than any excuse. Before logging off, I typed a short resignation letter. No drama, no extra words, just a clean break. I printed a copy, left it on HR's desk, and walked out into the evening air. For the first time in months, I didn't feel heavy. The company wasn't my problem anymore. Brent wasn't my burden anymore. And as the city lights flickered on, I realized sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't staying to watch the ruins. It's walking away while the fire still burns behind you. Leaving that company felt like stepping out of a suffocating room and finally breathing clean air. For weeks, I'd been carrying the weight of Brent's arrogance on my shoulders. But once I walked away, that weight was gone. My phone buzzed constantly. Offers, interviews, recruiters who suddenly saw me as valuable. Funny how the world opens up once you're no longer trapped under someone else's shadow. I accepted a role with a mid-sized firm downtown. On my first day, the contrast was almost surreal. My new manager shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "If you're not at your best, stay home. We take care of each other here." That single sentence hit me harder than any corporate slogan. It wasn't just policy, it was respect, something Brent had never understood. The team welcomed me without suspicion, without games. During lunch, one of the senior analysts leaned over and said, "We've heard about your work ethic. You'll fit right in." Nobody paraded me as an example of suffering. Nobody used fear as motivation. Instead, people worked because they wanted to, not because they were scared to lose their jobs. Meanwhile, news about Brent trickled in. He tried to pitch himself as a consultant, but word of the collapsed contract had spread faster than he could rebuild his reputation. Clients didn't want to touch him. Former employees whispered stories, and soon his name became a cautionary tale. Proof of what happens when ego blinds leadership. I didn't gloat. Didn't need to. The universe had done what I never could have orchestrated so cleanly. My revenge wasn't loud. It was steady, patient, inevitable. On a quiet Friday evening, I sat by my apartment window overlooking the city. The skyline glowed, and for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about growth. I had new projects ahead, a team that respected me, and the freedom to finally invest in myself. I realized then that Brent had never won. Not really. He thought control was power, but power fades. Respect, health, dignity. That's what lasts. And I had all three now. The man who once forced me into an office with a fever was gone. The company he worshipped was crumbling. But me? I was standing taller than ever, building something real. And that was the moment I understood. Revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life. It's about reclaiming your own. Looking back now, it's almost surreal how everything unfolded. One man's pride, his refusal to listen, his obsession with control. It all became the seeds of his own downfall. And the irony? He thought forcing me into the office sick made him stronger. In the end, it was the very thing that exposed just how fragile he really was. I didn't sabotage him. I didn't shout or start a war. All I did was survive, document, and keep moving forward while the truth played out in plain sight. Brent built his empire on intimidation, but he forgot the simplest rule of leadership. People aren't machines. Push them too far, and the whole system breaks. When I left, I thought maybe I'd feel guilty, but I didn't. Not for a second. He had every chance to change course, to put his employees first, to show an ounce of humanity. He chose arrogance every single time. And when the collapse came, it wasn't my doing, it was his. Now I live differently. I work for people who value respect over fear, health over numbers, and people over pride. My life is calmer, brighter, and finally free of the constant tension that used to sit in my chest like a stone. That's the real victory, not his ruin, but my peace. So here's my question to you. Do you think I did the right thing by letting it all play out? Or should I have done something different? What would you have done in my place? If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of justice, revenge, and people finally getting what they deserve, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. I've got plenty more stories to tell, and trust me, you won't want to miss them.